Hi, welcome guys. We're going to give it a couple of minutes for everybody to join. The topic of today's live is unschooling. This is an AMA. My eldest kid, who's 23 and was unschooled, is going to be joining us in a little bit, I think. And it's any questions that you have about unschooling or homeschooling. We have been unschooling for 19 years, and my spouse is a public school teacher. And yeah, I thought there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of questions that people have, and maybe people have some advice or experience of their own as homeschoolers or unschoolers that y'all would like to share. And I'm here to answer any and all of your questions. So welcome. We'll give it just a couple of minutes and see who else joins us. And feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I will just talk for a little bit as I'm working on my knitting. I got some feedback yesterday. Oh, actually, you know what? As I'm doing this, I'm going to put my microphone on. I got some feedback yesterday that my knitting was too loud on my live. So let me know if the needles are too noisy. Oh, yeah, awesome. Thank you for listening from the gym. On YouTube today, I do have a moderator. My friend Trish is going to help out with folks in the chat and try and redirect questions to me if I miss them. Yesterday in the live, which was about politics and anything, we were yapping about all kinds of things. The chat was going really, really fast, and it was hard for me to keep up. So Trish offered to help out today. So thank you, Trish, for that. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro, and I'll probably try and do a second intro a few minutes further in. We are an unschooled family. We have 4 kids. They are now 23, 21, 17, and 14. They have all been entirely unschooled until, they still are unschooled, but my 2 youngest decided to go to community college. So my 17-year-old decided at 15 that he wanted to go to community college. And my 14-year-old is doing the same thing. So he's a freshman in high school, but he's going to community college. I do have an entire unschooling playlist on my YouTube, and I've talked about it a little bit on TikTok as well. So I may have some videos on both my backup and my main TikTok about it. I'm glad you finally accepted help with modding. Yeah, it's really hard for me to accept help from anybody. So that is a definite flaw that I have. And Trish basically was like, I am going to mod for you today. I will be there and I will mod. So I'm super grateful that she did that, but she kind of had to, say that, insist that she was going to do it. So I thought that this would be a good chance for people to ask any and all questions about what unschooling is and isn't. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions about unschooling, especially I think on TikTok, because there have been a couple of prominent, I don't want to say grifty influencers who have said that they are unschoolers because it's kind of a radical concept. But my understanding of the way that they have been raising their children is not in alignment with unschooling, which is a legitimate educational philosophy. So I think a lot of people think that unschooling is unparenting or child neglect or educational neglect. And that's simply not true. It is a particular educational philosophy. And it has worked really well for my family. I'm not sure that it would work well for everybody's family, but it's worked really well for our families. I went to public school and my husband went to public school. I have a minor in elementary education. My husband is a special education math teacher. He is certified in social studies and math. He's taught classics. He's been a volleyball coach, a football coach, and he is certified in special education. So we definitely have a strong background in ed. I also taught at private schools and homeschool co-ops, earth science, chemistry, biology, those kinds of things. My bachelor's is in biology with a focus actually on ornithology and avian cognition. And my specialty now and for the last 28 years has been permaculture design. So a comment here. I am a special education teacher who is also autistic. Same for my husband. I teach special education virtually. Can't wait to learn about unschooling from you. I'm fascinated to know what it really is. Thank you. So if it's okay, we're about 5 minutes in, and maybe I will give a definition of unschooling, if that's okay. If you're watching on YouTube, at the very beginning of the chat, if you scroll back up, hang on, let me find my notes here. I linked to several resources that I really like that might help answer some questions and concerns that people have about unschooling. So I really recommend unschoolers.org. Let me get it pulled up here. as a good reference to understand a little bit about the history of unschooling and to understand some of the philosophy. Unschooling is a particular educational philosophy that was kind of crafted, initiated by John Holt. And he has a number of books that I think are wonderful, and everybody should read them, whether or not you are an unschooler. If you have children, if you care about educating kids, if you care about understanding how people learn, highly recommend John Holt. And at the beginning of the chat, I linked to, I believe, John Holt, the list of all of his books, so you can check that out. So unschooling, a lot of people think it. First of all, okay, let me back up a second. I hate the name unschooling. I did not craft that term. I would pick something entirely different because I think unschooling is really education outside of school, education without a formal industrial school model. And so that's where the term came from. Some people say whole life learning, some people say child-directed learning, some people say learning without school. There's not really a good term. I would love suggestions for another term that we could coin for unschooling that would not be so confusing. Hello in Denver. Okay, so unschooling. Unschooling was sort of proposed by John Holt, and there's not a book he's written that I don't recommend. So if you want to understand the ways that children naturally learn, Holt is really good at help explaining how learning happens outside of a formal educational industrial model. The school model that we use in the United States is only a couple hundred years old. It is the Prussian military model. And it was crafted to create compliant, obedient soldiers for the Prussian military. And the United States adopted it. Why? For the Industrial Revolution, here to create compliant, obedient workers for the assembly line. So the initial goal of our school model was not to like foster the education and autonomy and like free thinking, critical thinking of children. The model that we use in the United States was all about benefiting the robber barons, the corporate bosses, the factories, to create workers who would submit to a schedule, a routine, bells and whistles, having to have permission, only being able to use the bathroom when the boss says you can, only being able to eat when the boss says you can, putting all of, making all your widgets on the assembly line at the pace the boss puts out, and having one leader supervising a large group of peers, right? That is what our school model is based on. So naturally, that model does not work well for a lot of kids. And when we have a focus on children's needs and education, the industrial school model is going to butt up against that, right? They are two conflicting interests: free thinking, autonomous individuals whose dignity and humanity is respected. Like that's going to not mesh well with a system that is about creating obedient soldiers and factory workers. So naturally, you find that people who gravitate toward unschooling are people who do not do well under that regimented system of industrial school. So I'm going to read a couple of notes here from unschoolers.org. Unschooling has a cluster of beliefs, a group of beliefs. Belief number one is that children are hardwired to learn. And I think that's totally true. The school model that we have, being only a couple hundred years old, it's also all that we know in the United States. So I think it can be hard for us to think back. How have children learned throughout history? How have people gained knowledge and understanding throughout history? And it's the same way I think a lot of the youth can't imagine politics in the United States without Donald Trump. We can't envision a way that people learn outside of being passive recipients, being lectured to, having a regimented school schedule with discrete subjects, right? That's all we've known. But unschooling says that children are hardwired to learn. By nature, children are curious and passionate about exploring. The Magic Years, which is a great book by Selma Freyberg, uses the term infant scientists. Children are constantly exploring their world, testing their discoveries, and drawing conclusions. Play is a primary vehicle for these explorations, not only in the early years, but for older children as well. And I think that when we look at the ways that we educate children, there has been a large movement since the 1970s in the United States for play-based preschool. Now, there's been a backlash against that from folks who want a really highly academic preschool where children are taught to read and write at a very young age and taught math concepts way before they're ready. And we've seen for the last 25 years that that kind of regimented, highly academic preschool setting actually results in kids who are less likely to be readers as they get older and they have lower reading comprehension and that their peers actually catch up to them very quickly. So even way back when I was in college, it was already known that like highly academic preschools were not great. And this big push toward play-based preschool. My daughters went to a play-based preschool and it was wonderful. They learned social skills. They learned all kinds of concepts through free play and exploration. And I think that experience shaped very much our unschooling journey. If anybody watching is from Newport, Oregon, my kids went to the Mouse Factory and teacher Linda was amazing. She very much had an unschooly mindset. And it's all about children being naturally curious and how do we foster that curiosity. And this is the same way that adults learn, right? We learn very well through our interests and our passions and by exploring and testing things out. I'm catching up here on the questions. Okay. Hmm. Okay. People talking about the Prussian model. It seemed like students were abandoning being polymaths in favor of the hive mind. That's an interesting point. Okay. So belief number two. Number one, children learn through play. Adults learn through play and experimentation as well. Children are naturally curious. Belief number two, when you're interested in something, learning takes place. You may have heard in unschooling that people use the term autodidact a lot. The goal is to raise self-directed learners. The goal is to not crush a child's sense of curiosity, but to foster it. Because when you are interested in something, learning happens much more easily and you don't have to force it. I think this is a really core concept in unschooling. Think about what you've learned in your adulthood. What do you know a lot about? Most likely, it's the stuff you've stumbled across that really interests you. My husband developed celiac disease and needed a specific diet. I wanted to understand his condition and support his dietary changes. Because of my personal interest, I soaked up information about the topic in every way I could. I read about it. I talked to other people. I found cookbooks. I watched videos. It did not feel like a chore. It was fascinating to me. I didn't need anyone assigning me texts, asking me to write essays, or drilling me with quizzes in order to motivate me to acquire information. That's the author of this website, not me. I think this is really true. When you are interested in something, when you can tie it to something meaningful and profound in your real life, you learn more quickly and you hold on to that information for much longer. And again, that's been my experience as an adult. It also was my experience in public school. The things that I learned best and held on to were the subject matter that I was already really interested in, or the things that I learned outside of school. Yeah. Don't know if anybody else had that experience, but and I want to say here too, really quickly, um, when you ask kids to learn something that they are not cognitively, developmentally ready to learn, and you have to force it on them, and not only do they not have that natural interest that has been cultivated yet, but also they're just developmentally not ready. You are setting kids up to have an oppositional relationship with that subject matter for potentially a really long time. Why do you think so many kids in the United States hate math? Why do you think so many kids are such hesitant learners? We're forcing kids to read things and write about things that they've read when it's maybe above their grade level, or they're not ready for it. Their attention isn't there, and then they don't give a shit about the thing that you're asking them to dedicate a tremendous amount of time to. Right? Like I remember having to read books in elementary school, and I was like, I would just rather be reading My Side of the Mountain or Hatchet. Like I want to read what I want to read. And having that resentment about assigned material in school. So let me know if I'm going too fast. Happy to slow down. Okay, so belief number three for unschooling is that learning is a byproduct of play, pursuing interests, and developing passions. Learning is not the goal in and of itself, it's a byproduct. It's something that just happens naturally when you're passionate or you're immersed in an experience where you need to gain and acquire skills in order to function, right? We don't wake up in the morning and think, gee, I'd really love to know at least 500 words by the time I turn 3 years old, right? I'd better get busy with that vocab list. You just, as a young child, organically acquire those skills through your everyday life. And we're really accepting of this through the play-based preschool model, through what we understand of young children in the US. We're very accepting of this reality for young kids, but suddenly the minute they turn 5 or 6, we're like, no, it has to be regimented, discrete subjects that you study for 50 minutes a day. And we are going to dictate to you what you learn when, whether or not you are developmentally ready and whether or not you are passionate about that thing. And by the way, we know that you have tons of other passions. You got to set them aside and spend 7 hours a day studying what we think you need to learn, right? So it is that very much the system, the school, the teacher, the curriculum is dictated to the student, and the student's passions and interests are totally disregarded in traditional school. And that's part of what unschooling is pushing back against. Catching up on comments. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, I see people in the comments are, yeah, I loved Hatchet too. That's one of my favorite books. And My Side of the Mountain, Jean Craighead George is one of my favorite authors. So people in the comments who are not understanding, my husband is a public school teacher, and we are very, very supportive of public school and a diverse set of educational models, because kids are really diverse and we live under really different circumstances and have diverse needs. So I'm going to get into that in a minute. So please understand, we don't need to waffles and pancakes this conversation. I can talk about the benefits of unschooling, and that is not a condemnation of other school models. We can be critical of the problems in the industrial school model and still understand that children deserve access to a free, vigorous public education that supports their needs and respects their dignity as people. Okay. I hope that clears that up for folks in the chat. Okay. Back to the next point here. One example that is frequently brought up for unschooling is that most unschooled kids who do not have reading disabilities learn to read organically without anybody having to teach them, right? It's true of my eldest kid. If she'll join us in a little bit, she basically taught herself to read at 3. I didn't have to do anything. I just read to her, and like she had books around her. For my 2 middle kids who have dyslexia, they actually needed intervention, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So for me, one of the benefits of unschooling has been that it made it easier to realize when my kids needed extra assistance and when learning disabilities may be at play. It was much easier for me to have that realization, or to observe what was happening in my kids. Okay. Belief number 4 for unschooling: kids need facilitators more than they need traditional teachers. And this, I think, is a really big one. In a traditional school model, the teacher is an authority figure who is deciding what kids are learning, or again, the department or the school, or the state standards, what the kids are learning when. And unschooling turns that on its head and says, actually, it's the child's education, it's their learning experience, it's their life, right? And it's actually much more up to them. The child is the one who is in charge of their education. And that doesn't mean that we are leaving the kid up to their own devices and they're just like playing video games all day long, what have you. No, the child is directing the journey, but the adult is still a facilitator that is there supporting and making sure that the child has access to resources. So for me, in my experience, unschooling has been way more work than traditional homeschooling, way more work than sending my kids to public school, because you have to be actively involved in what your child is interested in. And for me, that has been fascinating, because I have learned about subjects that I never would have given a shit about, except that my kids were passionate about them. And that caused me to gain an interest, right? I want to understand what my kids are interested in. I want to supply them with experiences and resources to help feed those interests. Prime example is that my second kid, who's 21, she is a junior in college. She is a poli-sci major, and she's pre-law minor. She has wanted to be an attorney since she was 7. And you couldn't make me study constitutional law. And she, for fun, was reading, taking classes on Supreme Court case history and reading briefs, right? From a very, very young age. She was like, I want to be a lawyer. I really am interested in the rule of law. So we searched up and sent her to kid lawyer camp. And then she joined the homeschool mock trial team here in Portland. They were state champions. They went to nationals. She was captain of her mock trial team. She's now on a mock trial team in college. I would never have known anything about any of that if it hadn't been for her, right? She worked for a nonprofit for a number of years here in Portland that focused on legal homeless advocacy. Not this kid, the other kid. Hi, we're just talking about unschooling. I'm just doing the intro. This is Ruth. This is my 23-year-old.
Hello.
Hello. Would you like a microphone?
Sure.
I'm just running through like the basics of unschooling really quickly. I thought it would be good to have Ruth offered to come and hang out because, right, there's a perspective that we can bring as a parent that is not the same as the learner. Okay, so let me scoot over so that you can get on, be visible. Okay, is that you're still not in frame? Sorry about that. No, that's my bad. Thanks for being patient with us. Okay. Okay, let me get back to my notes here. So in unschooling, parents don't dictate specific subject matter, but there is a little bit of like, it's still up to us to make sure that our kids are being nudged and encouraged and exposed to ideas and concepts. And I have found that means it's a lot of work. Okay. So let me read this little section here from unschoolers.org because I think it's helpful. Okay. A child may learn something from or in spite of the adults in his world, but learning is centered within the child himself. Learning is not the direct result of teaching. Therefore, parents should not focus on being teachers in an unschooled model. Instead, the parent's role is to closely connect with the child, noting his or her interests, and then providing opportunities for the child to pursue that interest. This does not mean designating an integrated unit on spiders for a kid who's into bugs. Let's count the legs and learn how to spell spider together. Instead, the parent brings as much possible into the child's world to support that child's passion. A lot of unschooling is free exploration, right? Especially for young kids, but also for older kids. Okay. This means you might borrow lots of books. Unschoolers typically have, in Oregon, you can get an educator library card that lets you check out twice as many books for twice as long. And most unschoolers have like a huge shelf just full of library books because we want to make sure our kids are exposed to as much as they can be, right? And it's a little bit like testing things out in permaculture, where I frequently, when the kids were younger, we'll go to the library and we just get huge stacks of books. It doesn't mean the kids will use all of those books. There's no requirement to read everything there, but it's there and available if kids want them.
I was, however, reading them all.
Ruth was reading.
I probably read 300 pages a day.
Yeah.
Until like high school.
Yeah, Ruth was a prolific reader. Yeah.
My other siblings would tattle on me. They would be like, "Ruth's reading too much. She's not playing with us." And then you would make me play outside as if I was playing a video game or something.
That wasn't like anti-reading, but there definitely was a little bit of like, you should go outside and play and get some vitamin D.
It wasn't anti-reading. It was like, give your siblings more attention.
Yeah, it was like you had younger siblings who wanted to play with you, and you just would have been content to read all day long. Yeah, I think that's true. Okay, so
I have some notes.
You have notes on unschooling?
Well, in my brain.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say this is. I don't know if you can see. It's like that's sketches. That's not notes. Okay.
No, I mean I have some notes on unschooling.
Okay.
Okay. Well, on the way that the internet talks about homeschooling as a concept, both people for and against it.
Okay, so is that okay if we talk about that next?
Sure.
For and against unschooling? Let me just sum up really quickly. So in an unschooled environment, the parent is not uninvolved. It is not unparenting, and it is not educational neglect. And I've seen a number of people who want to unschool who like don't actually want to unschool. What they want to do is have their kids out of public school, but they don't want to bother to have a relationship with their kids or educate them. And so they call it unschooling, but it's really just like,
I think people don't, in a lot of online discourse, people don't really understand that there's a difference between homeschooling as a whole, unschooling, radical unschooling, unparenting, and educational neglect. Not that any of those things are mutually exclusive necessarily, but that they're not the same thing, and people will talk about them as if they're the exact same definition.
So unschooling is an educational philosophy, right? So when people ask like what's the difference between homeschooling and unschooling is a type of homeschooling. However, unschoolers can also go to school because it's what the child's passion is. So that's the reason the boys are going to community college. You've had friends? Yeah.
I've had friends who were unschooled, like they were unschoolers, but chose to go to public school or charter school. So it's not, unschooling is technically the philosophy. It doesn't, like if someone's homeschooled, they're not in public school, but an unschooler could choose to go to public school.
Yeah. Ruth, Trish says you gotta talk louder. Ruth has a quiet voice and I have a loud voice. Thank you for the feedback. So I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people don't understand the level of involvement that unschooling takes in terms of connection between the parent or the caregiver and the children, but also the kids in the community, right? So a lot of traditional homeschoolers. So if we look at the umbrella of homeschooling, think of it in terms of like religion is an umbrella, and under there you have all kinds of different religions, and then like even just under Christianity, you have all the different denominations, right? So think of homeschooling as like that, this huge umbrella term, and there's so many different philosophies and modalities underneath. And unschooling is probably more fringe and the most child-centered. And you can start with like what the Duggars do on one end, the like super religious, what we call school of the dining room table, where it's just replicating public school at home, but often using religious texts. And the goal is to protect your children from the evil influences of the world, to prevent your kids from becoming wokeified and worldly, and to make sure that they are taught through religious texts. And there's a lot of fear of popular culture in that, right? Would you say that's right?
Yeah. Something, were you going to say something?
No.
Something that really bothers me, both for like religious homeschoolers and for people who are really against all forms of homeschooling, is that neither one of those people are like really viewing the children themselves as autonomous people. Because for religious homeschoolers who are doing educational neglect, they are depriving their children of the autonomy of learning. They're like keeping it hidden from them because they think that they have to control them and that they can't have access to education because it makes them easier to control. But then also when people are really against homeschooling as a concept, they oftentimes are really framing children as like sort of like a pet, like something that the parent just gets to decide where they go. When they say like you shouldn't be allowed to homeschool at all, like it should be illegal, then that's like taking away autonomy of children who want to be homeschooled. And I think, yeah.
Well, can I piggyback off of that? Because in our experience, so traditional like religious homeschooling, then there's Montessori homeschoolers, there's classical conversations, which also tend to be conservative. There are Waldorf homeschoolers, there's like eclectic homeschoolers. So there's all of these different philosophies, many of which you can find replicated in different private school models or even public school models. But having a focus on the autonomy and dignity of children, I think is really important. And you bring up a really good point that most educational models in the US don't view the child's choice as the center, but unschooling does, right? It prioritizes the child above the system and above
mutuals here.
Above producing like, I think I said this in another live, the first school that my husband taught in, the motto of the public school was craft or like shaping tomorrow's model citizens, right? That was the goal, not the well-being of kids. So in our experience, a lot of people come to unschooling because the public school model was failing them in significant ways. You guys have never been to public school, but a lot of your peers were in public school. They were kids with disabilities whose disabilities were not being accommodated and their needs were not being met. They were queer, trans kids who are being discriminated against. There are an awful lot of minority kids who come to unschooling. And I know people have said in my comments before, like unschooling is something that privileged white families do. That's not true. If you look in the YouTube chat, I referenced there is a large, vibrant unschooling community that views unschooling as a way to decolonize education. And since 2020, there's been a big swell, particularly of Black homeschoolers in the United States, unschoolers in the United States, specifically viewing it as a form of liberation, as a form of decolonization from the industrial model of school. So that's, I think, really important. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say as an example of children having autonomy is like when people say, even if public school is bad for your child, you should still be obligated to keep them in public school, or it should be illegal to take them out of public school for like the greater good. I want to give an example of that. When we lived on the Siletz Reservation, the bullying of Indigenous children in the area in public school was so bad that they had to build their own school on the reservation. And I think in an instance like that, if they hadn't had the resources to build their own school, then someone who is really against homeschooling would say, well, they're obligated to keep those Indigenous children in that extremely racist bullying environment for the greater good. They wouldn't be allowed to have homeschooling or unschooling as an option. I just don't agree with that, because I think if the child, as an autonomous person, does not want to stay in this really toxic environment, that they have the right to, if they choose to be homeschooled or do an alternative thing.
Yeah, I think the center of unschooling is seeing and respecting the humanity of children, that they are not property of their parents, they are not future model citizens, they are not students, they're like human beings, and that children do have agency and children have their own passions and interests. I'm gonna go to some of the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So there's a question about IEPs and unschooling. It's different in every state. I have a lot of viewers outside the United States. So in the US, unschooling laws vary from state to state. And Oregon has very free and open laws. You have to have standardized testing, third, fifth, eighth, and 11th grade. And you can actually opt out of that standardized testing as a homeschooler and do a portfolio instead. And there are very few qualifications, but like just north of here in Washington State, you have to have a certified teacher look over your kids' work once a year. So there's different requirements state by state. But in Oregon, your child has a right to access public education for special ed services, for like music and sports and things like that as a homeschooler. So some unschoolers will register as homeschoolers with the state, and some unschoolers will try and fly under the radar and not register. And so our kids were registered homeschoolers, and that meant when my kids needed special education services, they were able to receive them at the local elementary school. It was a disaster, and we pulled our daughter out very quickly. Not this one, the other one, very quickly. But you can get an IEP and have accommodations. One of the benefits for us of my husband and I both having an education background is that once our two middle kids were diagnosed with dyslexia, we knew very early on that we were going to use an Orton-Gillingham method. We did bring in curriculum, right? So unschooling, you're supporting the needs of the child. It doesn't mean that if a child has disabilities that you don't accommodate for those. Of course you do, because you're prioritizing the needs and well-being of the child. So we did use an Orton-Gillingham curriculum called Explode the Code, which I think is really good for elementary kids who have dyslexia, who need to learn how to read. So we did do some of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Phonics is really important. The way that, this is kind of a tangent, the way that some young children are being taught to read right now for like just memorizing each word, and so then they're guessing. I think the way we were taught to read is better than.
You make a really good point, though, because educational philosophy, even in the public school, changes decade by decade. So when I was getting my degree, whole language learning, if there's teachers in the chat, you're going to be horrified. Whole language was really, really in the late 90s. And that's what a whole generation of teachers were being taught, was the whole language model. And there was a lot of poo-pooing of phonics. And then that has now swung back the other way and then swung back again. So there's this constant changing of the way our children are taught based on whatever is, en vogue for educators. Yeah. Okay, let me look at some other questions. When we look at unschooling, I'm not saying that every child should be unschooled, and I'm not saying that every family has the capability to unschool. It's a significant investment, and I've gotten a lot of comments that like only privileged people can unschool. Families make real significant sacrifices in order to be able to unschool. And oftentimes they really can't afford it, but their mental health is not good. The child's education is being neglected. The child is doing is struggling really, really hard in the public school model. And often unschooling parents have exhausted every opportunity within the public school system, and they come to unschooling as a last resort. And they often make real sacrifices to their careers in order to be able to do that. So let's see, hang on a second.
Can I talk about?
Yeah, whatever you want to talk about.
Well, something that unschooling parents would talk about a lot when I was a child is like, well, I know it's different state by state, but like the different requirements for being an unschooler, like standardized testing. And they would often, especially like the radical unschooler families we would know, would like sort of rebelliously do like the bare minimum. Or like I know there was like some standardized testing where you only had to get a certain percentage, so they all just like checked to A. They didn't even try. And I understand why they're doing that. I think a good, well, not even compromise, but a good system to have is having something like that, like having testing. Maybe not the way that they do it now. There are definitely ways to improve it. But I think having something to screen out cases of genuine educational neglect, I think, is more important than letting radical unschoolers just do whatever they want forever. Because when people say, like, how do you know that when you let people unschool, they're not just going to, like, go lock their kids in a shed all day and, like, never let them see the outside world? I think having some kind of, like,
oversight,
some kind of oversight is actually a good thing. And that, like, I don't even think it helped me. Like, it didn't, the way I turned out as an adult and like my success in college, I think, was completely inconsequential of having to do like those standardized tests.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
I do think that is an important thing we can have to prevent educational neglect, because educational neglect doesn't just happen in homeschooling, but it's also, it's different from homeschooling, and it does happen in a lot of like rural religious homeschooling.
Can I read this comment, because I think it's really seems okay. Hang on, let me find the question. I lost it. The chat is going. How are children who were educationally neglected at home ever supposed to catch up in school? There's no free education as an adult. There is free education as an adult, right? Like
Khan Academy's taught me way more than.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned so much as an adult from just we live in the information age, right? I think, though, it raises a really good point, and it's a really valid point, and I think I talked about this in an earlier video on unschooling, that educational neglect really happens, and homeschooling in the United States creates opportunities for abuse and neglect. But also kids are abused and neglected in the public school as well. So it's not unique to homeschooling, but I think that when you look at the diversity of people who homeschool, there are people who do it to control their kids and to keep their kids out of the eye of the government and to enable them to be abusive. And so I agree with Ruth. I understand why a lot of homeschoolers and unschoolers don't want regulation from the government. A lot of people come to unschooling and homeschooling because they are rightfully distrustful of the public school model and how it has harmed their children. And so whether, a lot of unschoolers that we know have had particular individual teachers who've been wonderful, right? And kids in the public school deserve a good education. And there's so many good teachers who are doing the best that they can within a system that's pretty flawed, and in Oregon, massively underfunded, right? Much of the US. But I think there has to be a balance, right? When you unschool your child or you homeschool your child, especially in a rural setting, who's the mandatory reporter? Who's there? Where is the oversight to make sure that neglect is not happening? So I think that's a real valid concern. And also understanding that while I personally believe unschooling works best for all kids, it doesn't work best for all families. Oh, thank you. My moderator, Trish, has to dip. Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Trish, for modding. It doesn't work best for all families, and there are other educational models that work really well. Human beings are really diverse, and so there are kids who learn really well in the public school model. There are kids who learn extremely well from Montessori or Waldorf or other different Charlotte Mason, for example. Other educational philosophies work well, but I think there's not a one-size-fits-all model. So we should support families who want to unschool. Should we try and make unschooling the norm in the US? No. Should we respect the dignity and autonomy of children and give children, allow children to access their own agency for all kids, whether or not they're in public school? Yes, I think so. Yeah. Let me cut. Do you have thoughts?
Not presently.
How are children with mentally ill or traumatized homeschooling guardian teachers supposed to stay safe and healthy role models if they're not given access to other mentors? Okay, great question. Great question. First of all, I don't know if anybody else has experienced this. I had teachers in public school who were straight up abusive and obviously like unwell. So I think when we're looking at kids' experience in homeschool circles and in unschooling circles, there are kids in the public school and in every educational system. There's no place in American society where children are not exposed to abuse. I don't know any kid who is exempt from significant childhood trauma growing up in the U.S., especially because we live in a culture that doesn't treat children as full human beings. But you raise a really good point, and I think this is where I said earlier, it's not just the kid's relationship with their parents; it's the kid's relationship with the community. Unschoolers are typically very invested in the community and the kids are out in public. And so this question of like socialization, who's there supervising the kids? For the vast majority of unschoolers, the focus is on connecting your kids to the world versus the Duggar school, the dining room table, evangelical homeschooler is like hiding your kids from the world, being afraid of the world. Unschoolers want their kids to learn how to function in the world and believe that having those experiences gives their kids a chance to foster more passions and interests. So not only are unschoolers going to all kinds of like play dates and get-togethers with other kids, taking all kinds of like classes and workshops, they're also out in society interfacing with a diverse group of people. In the public school system, you are with your peers in a stratified classroom where you are only interacting for 7 hours a day with people your exact same age, and then an authority figure or 3 or 4 or 5 in terms of teachers. Unschooled kids interact with young babies all the way up to kids that are much older than them, right? It's much more of a, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this. Kids in public school often have the like, I can't play with you, you're 2 years younger than me, or you're 2 years older than me. Like you guys didn't have that kind of.
There's definitely like, well, I think it's more of a thing in like middle school. I found that like in high school, because a lot of my friends were in public school, they didn't care as much, but there was still that like treating people of a different age as like a different group or like you couldn't hang out with them. There was also, I feel like, not even just in like conservative areas, but like in school, it's kind of like very gender segregated. People treat girls treat boys as like a different species, and they'll make a huge deal. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh, a boy texted me." I felt like that was much more of a thing in like public school than in unschool groups where everyone was just co-ed.
And also, maybe you can talk about this too. In unschooling, because parents are not the teachers, they're facilitators. I think you guys all saw parents much more as peers to you than authority figures. Parents typically go by their first name, and like the idea is that kids and parents are on the same level. And so I don't know your thoughts there.
And that was really a distinction I also saw between unschoolers and then the more conservative homeschool families who would like call their parents Sir and Mrs. Martinez.
Yeah.
They would like use like their last names or like an honorific, and they would get like offended when I would call other adults by their first name and not their last name. Even if I had like asked the adult if that was okay, they would be like, "That's disrespectful."
Yeah, they didn't like it when I would try and I would tell other children like my name's Angela, and they'd be like, "It's Mrs. Baker." You call her Mrs. Baker. Yeah. Someone made a comment further up in the chat. Let me scroll it real quick. Speaking of traumatized parents and harming children, that is a societal issue, a systemic issue. You're absolutely right. We live in a punitive society, and that is the problem. Kids are also seen as property. Completely agree. Unschooling often goes really hand in hand with non-authoritarian parenting, and the focus for both is that children are full human beings, and you're trying to raise kids who are not going to need to spend a significant chunk of their adulthood recovering from the trauma of their childhoods, right? Which I think is very different than other conservative religious homeschoolers. Very, very different. There's a lot of emphasis on like the Teenage Liberation Handbook and viewing unschooling as a form of liberation. And I know I mentioned this earlier, for a lot of non-white unschoolers, unschooling is seen as decolonizing education. Think about Indigenous students and residential schools. Think about the way that Black Americans have historically and still to this day are treated in the public school system. The school to prison pipeline most impacts Black students, both boys and girls. And so there's a large movement of unschoolers that want to have a child dignity, agency focused education for their kids, and they view that as decolonization. I think that's so important to remember, because I think a lot of times there's two really big kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with them. I've made videos critiquing both of them, and I think they're both alt-right, actually. Unschooling accounts are accounts who are grifty influencers who decided that unschooling was a great, like, clickbait, rage bait kind of content, and they pulled their kids out of school. And they would make content being like, we're unschooling today. My 5-year-old is vacuuming out the car because everyday actions are learning, like real life actions are learning. And I think that's a bastardization and a like twisting of unschooling. Like, yeah, kids learn by vacuuming, or like kids learn basic concepts of fractions by measuring and helping you cook. But assigning chores is not unschooling.
I think we also have to remember a lot of those videos, and a lot of people are really only exposed to a lot of homeschooling, but unschooling specifically through videos like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also have to remember that, well, one, it's not a good example of unschooling, but it's not just a bad example. A lot of those are literally rage bait. They know that people are really against educational neglect and get really riled up on videos like that. So they intentionally will stage stuff like that.
Yeah.
And even if it's not rage bait, like even a public school family who is using their children as like mommy vlog kid content is not operating the way a normal parent is operating. They're staging things. They're treating their children as props and unpaid actors. And it's just not the way that people normally live their lives. So even if they're not like outright rage baiting and lying and making up scenarios, those parents are already abusing their children by treating them as props.
That's such a good point.
So, and you see this, you don't just see this in unschoolers, you also see this in radically conservative anti-science homeschoolers who then also see their kids as a prop for rage bait and content.
A vehicle through which they can earn money.
Yeah.
Right. I know people have often said, like, why are your sons not in any of your videos? Sorry, someone's texting me. Sorry. My daughters are 21 and 23. And so my sons are still minors. There are occasions in some of my videos, older videos that are like gardening videos, you'll see my sons in the background because they were like 5 and 2 and I was filming and they happen to be in there, but my kids have never, ever been the focus of my content because they can't consent. Kids can't consent to working for your social media, right? And I think there are a lot, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of homeschoolers and like mommy bloggers who use their children for content. And so that's that's a situation in which children are being exploited already on a daily basis.
I would say it's like, you wouldn't think of a single parent as being well represented by the resilient Jenkins.
Yeah.
Like that person is intentionally abusing their children and intentionally staging rage bait content and using their children as props because it gets views.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah. People can't separate. Ruth is really smart. My kids are like 1,000 times smarter than me. Yeah. Yeah. My kids have so much better insight than I do. And I think it's important actually to listen to the voices of not just parents, but especially listen to the voices of adult unschoolers. Part of the reason that we really leaned into unschooling is that we had connection. Portland is kind of a hub for a lot of shocker for unschooling. In the beginning of the chat, I dropped a link to the Life is Good conference, which is hosted here, which is an unschooling conference every year. We have never been because when my kids were younger, we could never afford to go. It was not in our budget. So I've never been, but a ton of our friends go to the Life is Good unschooling conference every year. And the parenting there is really focused on nonviolent communication and respecting kids' autonomy and like unschooling philosophy and creating a culture where children are respected and are viewed as equal members, not only in the family, but in society, and opportunities are given to kids to freely explore and, dive deep into their interests. So, do you want to talk about, people often will say, so I'll often use my kids as an example of like, unschooling doesn't look like how you see on social media. And unschooling is not educational neglect. So Ruth and B got their GEDs, and for different reasons. They both went to community college where they both graduated with 4.0s. My 17-year-old is about to graduate from community college with a 4.0. And you guys have been super successful in your undergrad. You and B are both at 4-year colleges, but different colleges. Do you have any thoughts on, like, when people say, well, your kids are outliers and it's just because you're smart and your kids are smart? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess, well, I've done a couple papers on, like, well, it was like early on in community college, but I did a couple essays on how homeschoolers perform in college. And some of the sources I found were saying that overall homeschoolers got better grades in high school, and that helped them perform well in college. I believe it also said homeschoolers on average did better in college. I do see a lot of criticism from people saying that, well, homeschoolers, high school grades are self-reported, like they just made them up, which is sort of true. I mean, when I made my own transcript, I just gave myself an A because I feel like I did get an A.
Because you mastered the subject, right?
Yeah. I mean, I had got my GED and I continued to get A's in college. I was being honest, but I just don't think we should hold, like, public school standard so high to, like, well, I don't think we should, like, hold people's high school grades as such a, like, well, like you were saying, like, one educational method doesn't fit everybody. I feel like how well someone does in high school isn't necessarily indicative of how well they're going to do. And I think it's just, to me, it's taught so inefficiently. You spend so much time in school, and then, like, I was able to teach myself all this stuff for, like, a year or 2 years of public school to then pass the standardized exams in just, like, a couple weeks.
Can I speak to that really quickly? Yeah. Someone said it's much harder to get your GED than to graduate high school. And I want to really quickly, there was a question much farther up in the chat. Do unschoolers get a high school diploma? Most of them either get a GED or they just apply to college and submit their homeschool transcript. A lot of colleges in the US, they don't give a shit anymore. But in Oregon, in order to basically, like, qualify for financial aid and to not have to take lower courses, if you have your GED, that gets you in, right? But I think it is harder. And Ruth had no formal schooling and then just decided, like, I'm ready to get my GED. I'm just going to study for this test and take it.
The thing about GED, I mean, I can't speak to how much different it is than getting a high school diploma and taking exams in high school, but it's 4 tests. 3 of them are the same. You read a passage and you have reading comprehension. So you'll answer questions about the passage.
So it's not really about science, it's about reading comprehension.
No, not at all, because you don't have to have studied anything about science. You just have to be able to prove that you can read a passage about climate change and then answer questions from it. They're all reading comprehension. So I believe it was political science, social science, and then just reading was the other one. But the only thing that was different about the language arts one was that it was, like, fictional. It's just like a story. But they were all essentially the same thing. I didn't have to know anything about political science. Yeah. The math one was actually math, but I mean, I was told what topics I would learn and then I studied them. So I think the most important tool that's helped me be successful in college is learning how to teach myself things and be self-directed, because maybe even, like, if you're taught that you have to spend like those 8 hours in a classroom every day in order to be able to learn, then that might hinder you from knowing that you can actually just teach it to yourself very quickly.
Yeah.
It's very inefficient.
So I think that's another good point, is that a lot of people are concerned that unschoolers spend so much time doing free exploration and play, or like socializing, or even playing video games, right? Your brothers spend a lot of time playing video games. And like George, my youngest kid, learned not how to read. He learned how to read by playing Minecraft with friends online. He learned how to do multiplication by playing Minecraft with friends online. So understanding that like everything kids do, if they're passionate about it, they will organically be learning things. But there's a lot of criticism that y'all spend too much time playing and not enough time studying. But I think what you found and what your siblings have found, and what John Holt would argue, is that when something is contextualized in your real life and it's meaningful for you, you can learn it much quicker and you retain it much better than if someone tries to force you to learn something when you're not interested and you're not ready to learn it. Yeah.
I think probably the biggest thing that like parents having an oversight for unschooled kids that will benefit them is like making sure they get outside, because you're the one with the car and you know where to go. But I think having free reign to like learn about things that you're interested in is a really good way of teaching self-directed research. And then again, like having a couple standardized tests that you have to study for will also, I think that also, like, well, I said I don't think it would have impacted how well I did in college if I did or didn't have to take those standardized tests. But I do think early on they taught me how to efficiently teach myself that stuff, because I wasn't in school for 8 hours a day. I was just like told what would be on the tests, the subjects, and then I studied them for a week or two.
Someone says PCC rules. There was a question earlier up that did all my kids, did they do dual enrollment? So the boys are enrolled in a public school here, but they basically go to community college full time and they get high school and community college credit. So Hal is about to graduate from high school with his Oregon honors diploma. So he'll have a public high school diploma and he will have his associate's degree, and then plus a bunch of other credits on top of that. So he'll be transferring in. He'll be a freshman in college, but credit-wise, he'll be a junior at 18. The girls didn't do that. They weren't interested in that. There were different things.
I didn't really know about it.
Yeah, and there were different things going on for them. There are a lot of public school districts in Oregon that have dual enrollment. Parkrose is not one of them. Parkrose really focuses on AP classes. And so you looked at one point whether or not you wanted to enroll in the high school to take AP classes, and then you were like, no, this is not for me. Right? The whole idea behind unschoolers is that you're not like allergic to the public, you're not afraid of the public school. If your kids want to do that, then a real unschooler, I think, would be supportive of that. Something else that happened when the kids were really little is that Ruth, Ruth is autistic. Ruth was hyperlexic. She learned to read very, very early on her own. And as my eldest kid, like that was the normal for me until her sister, like I didn't really realize there were a lot of differences until her sister came along. Wait, I just lost my train of thought.
We're going to talk about milestones, because this is something.
Yes. It's not true. It won't really end. Okay.
This is something I think is really important, is that people, so part of why people are really against homeschooling is they're really worried about milestones. And I really think that hitting milestones at a certain point in your education is not really very important. Like my sister didn't really learn to read until like 14, and that's because she has dyslexia. It wasn't because she was educational.
She knew how to read, but she wasn't an avid reader, right? And we listened to tons of audiobooks, but she like didn't read for fun. But
also
can I interrupt for a second on that? Because you have tons of friends who, if you look at the American public school model, when my mom was a kid, so just 2 generations ago, children were not taught to read until 2nd grade, the beginning of 2nd grade. So that's age 7. And now we want kids to learn to read at age 5. And a lot of kids are not developmentally ready at 5. And so there's a range of, like, think about when kids get their teeth and they learn to walk. there's a range of what is normal. But in an industrial school model, the system needs all kids to be on track, learning at the exact same time and developing at the exact same pace. And that's not realistic. So while Ruth, for every kid that learns to read at 2.5 or 3, like Ruth, there's a kid like B who really isn't reading on grade level until 8, right? But then still goes on to be really successful and also really knows herself as like a dyslexic person, like really good at advocating for accommodations that she needs and using appropriate technology, right? Unschoolers, I think, because you guys have a strong sense of self and agency, you're really good at advocating for your needs. And like, you don't, can we do a tangent on this really quickly? Like, one of the big things that I think is different between my kids and a lot of other like more conservative homeschoolers and public school kids is that like, you guys don't take shit from anybody, right? Like, you know your mind and you know like what's bullshit and you're willing to call it out because you've been able to call it out at home and amongst your peer group, right? So I think there's a lot more. I don't know what the word is for that.
Yeah,
You have thoughts? Yeah.
I don't know if I can attribute this to one thing because I feel like there's multiple things, but I feel like kids my age, not only do they not advocate for themselves, but they like are just really passive in college. And I'm sure this is the case in public school as well because I see teachers talk about how they'll be like, okay, if you don't understand the material, you have a problem, please come to me. And then nobody ever messages them. Nobody ever asks for help. They're just like, oh, no. And this is really true in college. Like, so many times, I will like set up a meeting with my teacher basically every single class to talk about problems I have or like areas I might need help or like have suggestions. And they're always like really happy that I'm actually talking to them because they're like, so many other students have problems, they just never talk to me about it.
Because they don't know how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. And I find that because I'm so vocal about talking to the teacher and asking questions and like making suggestions.
Thanks, Mark. I didn't know that.
Other students will like come to me with the questions. They'll ask me, well, how do I ask for an extension? Or do you know when this is? I'm like, well, you should be asking the teacher. I know they're usually more comfortable talking to other students. I think this might also be, it kind of seems like a pandemic baby thing. Like it might not be a homeschooler. It might be like a generational thing, not just a homeschooler versus public school thing.
I don't know, but do you think some of that is that you have not been raised in a system to see adults as authority figures versus public school kids have been, and like don't speak until raise your hand and wait to be called on, right? I did a video quite a while ago that talked about like kids in public school and the struggles with like not having agency over their own bodies, like having to ask permission to go pee is something that unschooled kids could never conceive of, right? Like, why would I have to ask an adult for permission to take care of my own bodily needs? It's the same thing. Like, I don't need to ask permission for like, can I eat? I can just go to the fridge when I'm hungry and get a yogurt, right? And so that regimented, like needing to have permission or being a passive recipient and waiting for an authority figure to bring something to you is not something that you guys have been raised with.
Yeah, I just think, I don't know if it's like a generational thing, a public schooler versus homeschooler thing, or like, I don't know, pandemic baby brain. But that's one of my biggest...
Oh, hall pass, yes, absolutely.
That's one of my biggest problems with my generation is they're not talking to other people, they're not advocating for themselves, they're just really like passive and I don't know.
Can I ask you, what do you...
I'm shy too.
Ruth is very shy.
I'm not an extroverted, demanding person. I feel like, I don't know.
Can I ask you, what do you feel... So I get this question all the time because you guys have all done really, really well in community college and then obviously in college for the two of you that are there. What are the ways that you feel that unschooling has made it more difficult for you to transition from unschooling to because right, unschooling, loose, not structured, even though B did a bunch of classes and she did mock trial and George has taken classes through a homeschool co-op, like you're moving from a really unstructured, child-centered way of learning to institutional learning for the first time. And the complaint that I hear from people is like, well, your kids need to have K through 12 formal education or they're going to hit college and they're going to combust because they don't know how to operate in that system. that's not been true for us. So do you have any thoughts on like, are there ways that unschooling has made you disadvantaged in college?
Well,
this is where I'm going to look bad. So go for it.
It's hard to say for certain because I feel like the early part of the transition was the hardest for multiple reasons. People still treat you like a child in community college because, well, first I did a couple classes at Mount Hood, and Mount Hood, it kind of sucks. And they really, even though I was the only high schooler there, they really treated us like kids. Like, we had to ask to go to the bathroom. They took our phones away. It felt like high school, even though a lot of the people in the class were older. Some of them were like 50. I don't know, it felt more like how people described public school. Like, there wasn't a lot of autonomy, and they'd like look down on us. They belittled us. I feel like maybe it's partially because a lot of the people they were high school level classes, so a lot of them were adults or older adults who had failed high school, and then the teachers resented them. They're like, you shouldn't even be here. You mentally a child.
Not really graded on you, right? That was not an environment you were used to being in.
Yeah. And I feel like PCC was much better, but still there were a lot of teachers who looked down on us, treated us like children, and they weren't
College often feels like high school with cigarettes. That's true. That's fair. I went to a college that had self-governance. I went to Grinnell College. Shout out to all the Iowans that had self-governance, and I realized like going to a college that at the time had basically no rules is very different than most people's experience of college. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I feel like, and then at four-year university, there's still the teachers who suck, but I haven't really experienced anyone treating us like children or like a lack of autonomy. It's just unfair rules or like a bad curriculum. So that's fine. You would find that in the workplace too.
Yeah, would you say that you have a lower, because I if I were to evaluate the ways that I think homeschooling or unschooling has disadvantaged you, because there are positives and negatives, right? Like, we can't have all experiences at once, right? I would say that you guys have a lower threshold for bullshit than you're not used to dealing with it, and you have a stronger sense of like, well, why is that rule? Like, you want to question things instead of go along, and that has caused some problems. Like, why can't I have an extension? I've been sick. Why is it that you can't extend this deadline? Or like, my internet was out. Why is this deadline firm? That doesn't make any sense. Or why can't I have an alternative? Right. So yeah.
I don't even think that's a setback. I mean, it's annoying, but I feel like it's annoying to everyone. I'm just more vocal about it, so I usually get something done about it if I can. I'll just be annoying back until I can see if there's anything I can do about it. So I don't think that's even a setback. I feel like the biggest setback, which again, it's hard to tell because I'll explain why. I feel like my biggest setback is socialization. I wasn't socialized the same way the public school kids are socialized. It's hard to know because I also do have autism spectrum disorder, and because the transition from Mount Hood to Portland Community College to university, it's gotten better every step of the way. So at first I was like, oh my god, nobody will talk to me. I like thought I was kind of just like a freak. Like, literally, my experience in Mount Hood was I would get paired with someone, and for a group project, they wouldn't speak to me. I would try to talk to them, and they would just give me stink eye. They wouldn't talk.
Can I ask you about this? So I think you make a really good point here, because you said your concern is socialization. But you don't mean a lack of socialization. You mean you were socialized differently.
I do think there was less socialization than if I had gone to public
with your
school.
direct peers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like you don't? I guess the thing I've heard, because I think it's very different, because B is incredibly well socialized, but she's also neurotypical, really extroverted, and then did mock trial.
Went to high school.
She took classes with other public, like she took formal classes, and I think learned to operate in that kind of socialized environment. And your experience was really different. And yeah.
Well, I found it's now where I am now. I don't think I have any problem socializing. with my peers, but it's taken a while to get to that. Partially it's because the more specific, like degree specific classes I get, people get more normal. They actually want to talk to you. They're like normal people. They're also my age. They have similar interests. And also, we have similar interests because we have the same degree. Earlier on in Mount Hood, it was all like old people or like weird people.
But old people like you, right? You've always gotten along really well with adults because
they like being in Portland.
Because you're not afraid to talk to adults. Like even when you were a kid, I think adults always really liked you.
In Mount Hood, nobody would talk to me. Everyone was an antisocial freak. In Portland Community College, there was a lot of fresh out of high school people around my age that still were like weird and like didn't want to talk to me and thought I was kind of weird. So I talked to a lot of older people in Portland Community College. I would usually like find the one old lady auditing it and we would be besties. Or my lab partner for like over a year was in her 50s.
Someone said
we became really good friends.
Having autism also just makes socialization difficult sometimes. Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it.
It's hard to tell what is pandemic, what is homeschooling, and what is that. But I find in OSU now, I think it's fine. Honestly, I feel like it might just still also be a pandemic baby thing because, I don't know, you always say that I'm the most social Gen Zer you know. And again, I'm like shy and an introvert, but just like, I don't know, other people my age aren't really taking the initiative to talk to each other first. So then when I do that, then it's all good. But, well, another part of it was like people coming into Portland Community College out of high school, they had like established friend groups and like established hierarchies. Like they kind of knew who to sit with and like all like had
some of those social norms were established.
Well, they knew there was like a web of social media like following each other that I was not at all a part of. But
so I don't, if other people have questions, I'm trying to look at questions. Lots of good comments in the chat. I think when you talk about autism makes socializing difficult, talking about non-neurotypical people, I think that unschoolers definitely have a tendency for multiple reasons. We found that there are a lot of autistic people in unschooling. Some of that is because they were not doing well in the system, and some of it is because they were thriving and doing exceptionally well in periods when they were not in school. And maybe for the last little bit here, I would like to talk about what deschooling is, because most unschoolers are not like us, who have unschooled from the very beginning. Most unschoolers started out in the public school, and then it was not working for multiple reasons, typically, and they decided to withdraw their kid and unschool. So I think that there can be some confusion. The term deschooling is the process of deconstructing from your time in public school and processing that trauma and that experience before you start unschooling. So deschooling is this is an awkward word, unaccustoming yourself, right? That's not the right word, but it's deconstructing from your need to follow a set rigid schedule and the feeling of like, I have to follow a set curriculum and I have to be on task and I have to have a test every Friday. I have to have a vocab list. I have to do drills, right? Deschooling is taking that downtime. So a lot of people interface with unschoolers who are in that process of deschooling. And that looks just like free play. That looks like lots of time for rest, lots of time talking about what wasn't working in homeschooling before you really dive into what unschooling is. And it's often a readjustment period for parents and children, where the parent is learning, I actually have to be a lot more invested in my kid's life, and I have to be a lot more invested in their interests and working to facilitate that space for them. Like Ruth is like, being willing to drive them to places, being willing to search out opportunities for them. And so that was, that has been, in our experience, a really challenging period of time for families that are transitioning out of school into unschooling, but also has been a really beneficial time because it is that like deconstructing from institutional school. Someone said, how do you unschool on $50,000 a year? Yeah, so we a lot of unschooling families really struggle, and there's a lot of traditional Christian conservative homeschooling families who basically live in poverty, right? it's a whole other topic maybe we can get to in a different live.
It could be a whole other live.
Yeah, like trad-wifery and conservative homeschooling, because we have been tangentially connected to that community for many, many years. Yeah, I like the term deschooling. It's like deconstructing from religion, right? You are having to retrain your brain and process all of the like high control of school. And also maybe we could talk about, wait, do you have a thought? I'm yapping. So if you have a thought, you go first.
I was just going to add on to what I was saying before. I do feel like homeschooling the way I did it hindered me socially, but honestly, I feel like the thing that hindered me socially the most is that I don't like video games. Hello?
Hot's done.
What's done?
Cooking hot.
Oh, thank you. Guys, my pinto beans are done in the Instant Pot, if anybody wanted to know. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, George. Well, I feel like a big part of the way that my peers socialize is by playing video games, including all of my siblings. They keep up with their homeschooling.
You got that from me, though. I also don't like video games. So
I don't know where I got that from. I just don't like them. I feel like that's literally my biggest social barrier. Is like I have a perfectly fine time talking to people now.
But your friend group all play video games.
There's nobody that doesn't play video games.
Yeah. You have to come live in
and that's a huge part of
Mendocino with me.
I feel like that's such a huge part of public school culture. All of my friends that went to public school, that's a huge part of how they socialize. So I don't even know how much better I personally would have been socialized if I got to public school, because I don't like video games.
I had another point I was going to make about deschooling, but I can't remember what it was now. Maybe let's take like 14 more minutes and then we'll wrap up. I have other videos and I have a Substack that I tried to get out yesterday and didn't get out. Oh, you know what? So let me plug this really quickly. Hang on. Okay. So I spent last week at a farm that was a former hippie commune in Albion, California, outside of Mendocino. And Ruth went and visited her girlfriend in New York, and my 21-year-old, well, for like half the week, and my 21-year-old stayed home and hung out with the teenagers. I was really interested in this commune because unschooling was not a term yet in 1971, but they wanted to build a forest school and a free school for children. That was the original point of the commune. And as a non-authoritarian parenting, I was obsessed with any kind of communes or intentional communities that had a focus on the dignity and autonomy and like full personhood of children. So at Salmon Creek Farm, children got an equal say in the governance structure, and the original founding of the community was about a forest school and was about like a free school, sort of precursor to unschooling. And so I actually dug up, I don't know if you can see, their book is called Raspberry Exercises. It was 1971. So everybody had names like Raspberry and Walden and Moonshine and things like that, right? So Raspberry was one of the adults in the commune. And yeah, go get your pasta. This book, I just got it. There were like 2 copies on the internet. Look what a good copy. 1971. This is in good condition. That discuss all of their thoughts about raising kids in a commune, treating kids like full adults because they are, or excuse me, like full humans because they are full humans, having autonomy for children and like fostering kids' curiosity and education. So I'm going to read through this and I'm going to write about it. I'm really fascinated by it. And then there also was this publication that was put out, Country Women. This was $30 for this. These are very rare and old, and sometimes you can find them in Mendocino in thrift stores. So I got 2 copies of Country Women. And this one is specifically focused on raising kids, but this was a magazine that was put together, a publication by exclusively women in the communes in that part of California. There was a heavy emphasis on like queer liberation, feminism, and then raising children in a way that was compassionate and non-authoritarian. So I'm really interested to like dig into these, and I'm going to do some Substacks on them. I would love to collect all of these. They're very, very hard to find. If you ever find an issue of Country Women, email me. And you don't want it, I will buy it from you. They're very hard to find. So I think that sort of shaped, right, like my initial interest in unschooling was my college experience at Grinnell with self-governance, my interest in non-authoritarian parenting, my interest in like kids deserve to have a rich childhood that's free of trauma and where they get to explore their interests. I had a lot of resentment being a public school kid, having to spend, I feel like, divert my time and focus on subject matter that I didn't give two shits about. And why can't I just be home reading about, like, I don't know, ecosystems in the Amazon? Why can't I be home reading about any of the things that interested me, mostly ornithology at the time and also botany at the time? But instead, I had to be in public school learning about subjects that, like, I right crammed for the test and then immediately dumped all of that and have not retained it. But all of the things I studied in the books I read in childhood that I chose, I retained really, really well. Okay, so let me catch up with questions. My children are my favorite humans. I love kids. I think if I could do a free school, I would love to do that. Maybe that also brings up an issue. So my kids have all had really different unschooling experiences. And my 17-year-old, he went for a long time. There's a program in Portland called Rewild that is basically it's like a forest school. It was at the Children's Arboretum in Portland, and then a couple of other locations. Every Friday they would spend all day in the woods, which is for like a young boy with tons of energy, rain or shine, no matter how cold it is, pack their food, and they do storytelling, and they learn like knife and hatchet skills, and they learn how to put up a tent, and they learn about foraging and plant identification, and just like tons and tons of getting their energy out and socializing. So Hal did that for a number of years, and that was really, really good for him. But none of my other kids, George did not want to do that at all. It did not interest him. So when you have unschooled kids, what it looks like as an unschooling parent is often really, really different from child to child. There's no one size fits all. I think a lot of traditional conservative homeschooling, the kids are expected to fit a mold and what is convenient for the parents. And in that way, it's very much like institutional school. But in unschooling, like, you are doing super different things for different kids. So when you have 4 kids, it's a full-time job. It's very, very intensive. So I think it's not something that every parent wants to do or should be expected to do. And obviously, most of that burden is going to fall on the mother. Although in Portland, there's an awful lot of families where the father is very active in unschooling, or queer families where, like, both of the parents are all of the, maybe more than 2 adults in the household are taking ownership of being that facilitator, a group of facilitators. So, yeah. Thanks for letting me catch up here. Yeah. And I do think I'm not opposed to public school, right? I understand we live in a system where every child deserves a really good education. And I think that we have so many good teachers in school. Like, my husband is a special ed teacher because as a student, right, like, he is trying to be the kind of special education teacher he wished that he had, right? As an autistic adult, the support that he can give to his students is what he wished he had. And all kids deserve that. And I think overwhelmingly it's the system that we have that is failing so many of our students, trying to make really diverse people fit into a mold, and it doesn't work super well. Yeah. Sadly, in Arkansas, most homeschoolers are super religious. That's the home of the Duggars. We are not. It's super hard. When we lived on the Central Oregon coast, all of the homeschoolers were religious, basically, all of them. And people had to drive to Corvallis to find homeschoolers who weren't. It was very, very, very challenging. And by religious, I mean like literally IBLP, the same cult the Duggars were in. Super, super conservative. And a desire to just control kids.
There's Bush microchips in the soda. That's what they'd say.
Bush microchips in the soda?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
And conspiracy theories. They'd be like,
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sugar makes you gay.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for taking your microphone off before you ate in front of everybody. That's nice of you. Mm-hmm. Not everybody. Okay, maybe we'll go like 7 more minutes. Thanks for hanging out with me, you guys. I got so many requests to talk about unschooling, and I don't know if that cleared up questions that people have. I think it's really difficult because we are raised in a system. Most of us are products of the industrial school model, and most of us have a really difficult time conceptualizing what learning looks like outside of that, even though for us as adults, we are learning outside of that. Yeah.
Oh, it was no joke. They
Hi.
really believed it.
Oh yeah, they really believed it. The new human rights movement. Okay. Peter Joseph, I will look into that. Oh, Ruth, as a fellow autistic person, I got your soda microchip joke immediately.
I said it was no joke. They really believe that.
Microchips in our ravioli. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know. Do you think, I get this question a lot too, because I've said a number of times on live that you and your sister don't want to have kids, and probably the boys are 17 and 14. I mean, you guys are young, you're 23 and 21. So who knows, you may change your mind. Do you feel like your experience being homeschooled or like having a bunch of siblings has made you less likely to want to become a parent?
No, it's the economy.
It's the economy. And you like kids, actually. You're really good with kids. To an extent.
If my partner had a kid, I would have a kid, but I'm not going to go out of my way to make one.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I do feel like we might be a little bit outliers. Most unschoolers don't have 4 kids. There are some bigger families, but
I also probably wouldn't be an unschooler because I would be working full time.
yeah, and that would be fine. Yeah. How does unschooling fit in a non-traditional home setting? My family is planning to buy an RV and move to Corvallis. Oh, Corvallis is lovely. There are lots of unschoolers who do, I think that's the overlap. Again, we're looking at that big umbrella of educational philosophies. There's world schooling, which I think is something that definitely takes a lot of privilege. World schooling, I think, is also more popular with some like Australian homeschoolers, where people do much more traveling. And we have some unschooler friends who did world schooling, where you travel, like you just said, we're going to travel for a couple of years. And our kids are going to learn through those experiences and not have any formal education. That's definitely one approach. It's not something we've been able to access, but there are loads of non-traditional family circumstances. And people ask, like, how can you unschool if there's a one-parent household? That's a really good question. And I think that raises the question. There are members of our social circle who are single parents who unschool incredibly well. And they make their work around their kids' needs, right? I've always worked at least part-time while unschooling. And but I do think it again poses that question of there are kids who are experiencing educational neglect within homeschooling and unschooling circles, and that we as unschooled parents should not be defensive about that. We should really have an open conversation, because if we are unschooling because we care about the humanity of children, we should care about the humanity of children and make sure that kids are not being abused and neglected. Yeah. You can pick up rocks, look at mountains, look at different topographies, and stare at the sky. The oceans talk about so much with or without other books. I think that's really true. Unschooled kids learn to use their observational skills really, really well. There's a lot of observing. I think a lot of unschooled kids are really art inclined because they have free time to just create whatever kind of art they want. You, Ruth, you do more. What would you say? You're
I sort of alternate between. Well, first someone asked, "Are you unschooled or homeschooled?" We were unschooled. Yeah. I was unschooled. I went to public school.
I went to public school. Yeah.
I sort of alternate between like fiber arts. I get really into needle felting, and then digital art. I draw furries on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So. B does canvas painting.
Oh yeah, B is an acrylic painter, and she's really prolific. Question: I'm curious if there were subject, skills, topics you wanted your children to learn, and if so, how did you introduce those? Okay, this is a great question. I am really musically inclined. I played several instruments. I was in band, and I was in choir. I was in jazz band. I played the piano for many, many years. My children have zero inclination to be musical. We had a piano for many years. We bought a guitar. I have a hammered dulcimer. I've tried everything to get my kids to be interested in music.
We didn't give a fuck.
They didn't give a fuck. So I let it go. I was like, okay, this is not about me. If that's not what my kids are into, we're just going to set it aside, right? And so for unschooling, there is a lot of exposing kids to things and then letting them decide. There's a lot of like giving your children permission to quit and to fail. That happens a lot. Like George played futsal for many years, and then he was like, I don't know, maybe like 3 years, 3-4 years. And then he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. okay, well, you don't have to stay in this just because this is a sport that you have done for a while. There's a lot of that, testing things out. And I do have to say, in terms of expense for unschooling, that can be one more significant expense. Tons of art supplies, tons of like buying books and like materials and things that children test out and experiment with. And then they're like, I got what I needed out of that. I'm ready to move on to something else. And I think that if we look at children's failures as they completed whatever process, they got whatever they needed to get out of that experience or that material or that class, and they are deciding for themselves when they've had enough and they're ready to move on, that no longer makes it failure. It's like, oh, they accomplished what they came here for, right? I learned this about myself, that I am 0% interested in learning an instrument. That's okay. I learned that I am much more interested in drawing and painting.
I can still learn violin.
You can still learn violin. Yeah.
But
Well, that's also a good point. It's not too late to come back and do it at another time. Yeah.
You said I should wait till our neighbor builds his soundproof shed though, because you don't want.
I do hate the violin. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Yeah, interested. Yes, no set curriculum and following your kids' lead, but oftentimes young children don't know what they're going to be interested in. And so lots of exposing kids to things. One question that I get a lot is many unschoolers let their kids have pretty unfettered access to the internet. And you guys have pretty, you guys all have pretty unfettered access to the internet. And also most unschoolers don't limit their kids' time on, they don't limit their kids' time on screens, watching TV, watching movies. There's much more of an emphasis on sitting down and doing it with your kids or having conversations with your kids so that you're not making your kids afraid to or ignorant of how to use these platforms, but more having conversations about like, what do you think is a healthy limit? Like, okay, George, you've been playing video games with your friends for the last hour and a half. What do you feel like you are accomplishing the other things that you need to accomplish in your day?
Hour and a half is really underselling it.
He does game a lot with his friends. But when he was younger, maybe, right? Like having conversations so that kids are still making those choices, but you're facilitating, you're guiding them through the thought process of like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, it's the same thing I think when kids are learning about their hunger cues. Like, are you actually hungry in this moment? Or like, are you grouchy because you're hungry? Or are you trying to eat because you're bored? Like what connect with yourself and figure out like what's actually really going on for you, and helping kids understand and know their bodies and their brains better, I think is a big part of that. Yeah.
I think children's safety on the internet is a really big topic right now. I think what is much safer and more harm reduction than banning them from the internet or limiting their time on the internet, like locking up their phone at night or something. I think it's really, really important for parents to know what their kids are doing on the internet and like feel like their kids can talk to them about anything they saw on the internet and like even like try and be a little involved in their interests rather than like locking their phone up at night, because then they'll learn to be sneaky. And I also think it's important to make sure they're not just dead.
Her name's Ruth.
Make sure they are in fact getting outside. I know 14-year-olds are kind of hikikomoris, and were, so is George a little bit, but
do you think
as long as that doesn't continue too long and they eventually go back to seeing the light of day?
Do you think that connects right a lot with non-authoritarian parenting? Is like you have an environment in which kids aren't punished, and so they don't need to sneak and hide, right? Because they're not going to get in trouble. I think that it's very difficult to unschool your kids with an authoritarian parenting framework, or you do end up with kids who sneak and hide and lie, right?
Yeah, I think like feeling like having your kids feel like they aren't scared to tell you what they're doing on the internet, and then also just being aware of what they are doing is, I think, the main way we can keep kids from falling down pipelines.
I think that's true.
That's a big problem right now.
I think older adults should listen to you guys about what you think would keep you safe on the internet, right?
I do think also like you should be aware of like what are dangerous things on the internet, and then have conversations with the kids about not doing those things. Don't go on Kik. Don't go on 4chan. Don't go on, I don't know.
Yeah. But I think being an unschooler means that you have to be really invested in what your children are doing, and your children are like full members of your household that you want to have active relationships with. So it's really not just kids do whatever they want. Maybe we'll close out with this. I know we keep running really late. People ask, what is the difference between unschoolers and radical unschoolers? I did not add in my link at the very beginning of the chat, I did not add a link to Sandra Dodd with 2ds.com. She is somebody who is really held up as an expert on radical unschooling. I have found over the last 15 plus years that her interaction with adults online is not great. She doesn't model the same way she treats kids. She doesn't treat adults that way. So I don't tend to recommend her. But she talks about radical unschooling. Radical unschoolers are committed to letting their kids do whatever. The kids make all of the choices. And that has not really worked for us. I would not call us radical unschoolers because I have seen the way that creates a situation in households where the parents are not on an equal footing with kids. They're afraid to tell kids no. They're afraid to be like, actually, that doesn't work for me, or no, thank you. And I want to model for my kids, like, actually, I'm not down with this, right? Actually, this is inconveniencing me in a certain way. And like, we need to have a conversation about this as family members. Radical unschoolers are like fully committed. If your kid wants to eat Doritos all day and play video games all day, radical unschoolers would say they are getting something out of that experience. And I think that's true. They are getting something out of that experience. How many of us have eaten junk food until we got sick and then we're like, well, there's my limit, right? I need to figure out for myself how to have healthy balance about the food that I'm putting in my body. Or the same thing, you like binge watch a bunch of movies and then you're like, well, shit, I didn't get any of these other things accomplished that I wanted to do in a day. Like that is a learning experience. But in a household with 6 people, radical unschooling has not worked because I think there is an element of, I don't want to say selfishness to it, but we need to have ongoing conversations of like, actually, we need to get your sibling to the doctor. We need to get the dog to the vet, or we have a commitment that we have to go to, or I'm not interested in being a short order cook. This is what I'm making for dinner. If you want something else, let's teach you how to cook that. And then you can make something else on your own, which you guys often do. You often cook your own food for dinner, but I'm not interested in like being a servant to my kids. I want to model for my kids. Like I can have agency. I can say no, and so can they. So yeah.
That sort of sets them more up for the real world.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And we have friends whose kids were radically unschooled and they have gone to community college and they've gotten their 4-year degrees and they're functional adults. That definitely happens. And that works for some families. But again, I don't think there's a one size fits all educational model because people are really unique. And so not everything is going to work for everybody. Right. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts?
Don't go too long.
Yeah.
I gotta go do my homework.
You got to go do your homework. Yeah. Maybe we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for letting me run really long. Yes. Okay. Thank you for the links that you're dropping and the people. David Graeber. Yeah. Gabor Mate. Yes. Okay. Actually, I have something I want to talk about from something that he wrote. Buckminster Fuller. Yeah. Thank you. I am putting together a list. I'm going to publish on my Patreon. It's a long list of several book lists for permaculture, for resistance work, for unschooling, for non-authoritarian parenting. I'm trying to compile like a master list that I can publish. And so I'll be sure to share those book resources. And also maybe I should expand it to websites as well. Let me know what you think. Thanks, Ruth. People say thank you. Thanks for taking time out to chat with us. I appreciate you being willing to talk about freely about what you liked and didn't like and what your thoughts are. Where'd you get that blouse? Is it Depop?
No. Bauhaus Mode at the Lloyd Center. SaveTheLloydCenter.com. They're gonna tear it down.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. And I am gonna finish my Substack and Ruth's gonna go do her homework. And we'll be back. I'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. for a permaculture live. That will be on my main TikTok channel and on YouTube. Any gardening, permaculture related questions. I've already been asked to talk about gurus in permaculture and permaculture design certificate courses. So I will be talking about that tomorrow and answering any and all questions that y'all have. So thank you. Thanks for attending. Y'all take care.